Good afternoon. Please come in and have a seat. It's good to see everybody. So good afternoon and welcome to the 106th AMS annual meeting and to our presidential forum. My name is David Stensrud and I'm your 2025 AMS president. It's great to see so many of you here. Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here as we begin what I know will be an engaging and thought-provoking week. I would like to also extend our sincere thanks to Peraton for their generous support of this presidential forum and the annual meeting. Peraton's commitment to innovation, earth science, and public service helps make conversations like today's possible. We are grateful for their partnership, and I'm pleased to welcome Drew Puring, Peraton's Senior Director of Growth and Strategy, who will offer a few brief remarks.
Good afternoon. I'm Drew Puring, and I'm proud to join you today on behalf of Peraton. It is an honor to support this vibrant, interdisciplinary community of scientists, engineers, policymakers, and mission leaders who are united by a commitment to understand our planet, protecting our communities, and preparing for our future. At Peraton, we operate in the confluence of science, technology, and national mission. We support NOAA, NASA, FAA, DoD, and other agencies where success is measured not only by innovation, but by impact. That means building and sustaining space-based weather platforms, enabling secure and resilient ground systems, and helping decision makers turn complex data into meaningful action. This year's theme, Fast and Slow Thinking, the human factor in a rapidly changing world, hits especially close to home. In this world of science and national security, we are asked to operate in two speeds, fast and deliberate. Fast thinking drives algorithms, the models, and sensors. It powers prediction. But slow thinking is what helps us interpret the meaning of the data. It is collaboration across agencies, the ethical decisions behind policy, the lived experience of forecasters and scientists. We've seen the consequences of leaning too far in either direction. Move too fast and we risk acting on incomplete information. Move too slow and lives, property, and strategic advantage can be lost. The real challenge and the real opportunity is finding the balance. At Peraton, we view ourselves not only as a technology company, but as a missions integrator, connecting the fast with the slow, the digital with the human. We're helping agencies modernize the aging infrastructure without losing connectivity. We're enabling AI and automation without sidelining human judgment. And we're investing in the talent that understands both systems and the stories that they tell. Personally, I've spent my career at this intersection where engineers, scientists, and public servants come together to answer big questions. How do we ensure accuracy under pressure? How do we bring clarity to uncertainty? And how do we make systems that serve the human mission and not the other way around? To the AMS community, thank you for leading the way. Your model is what it means to think deeply, act responsibly, and stay grounded in purpose, even as this world accelerates around us. Thank you, and enjoy the forum and the conference.
Thank you, Drew. So as Drew mentioned, this year's annual meeting theme centers on a theme that speaks directly to the moment our community is in. Fast and slow thinking, the human factor in a rapidly changing world. As we continue to make rapid advances in computational modeling, artificial intelligence, and environmental observations, it is essential that we also reflect on the human side of our work. How we think, how we make decisions under uncertainty, and how we communicate science all play a critical role in ensuring that our research and services truly benefit society. The Presidential Forum is designed to help frame that conversation and set the tone for the week ahead by exploring how human judgment, expertise, and collaboration interact with emerging technologies and scientific innovation. Today's discussion reflects the kinds of questions our communities continue to ask as we navigate complex challenges across weather, water, and climate science. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a story here. So May 3rd, 1999, that was a tornado outbreak in central Oklahoma. That also was the day of the F5 Oklahoma tornado. At that point in time, I lived in Norman, very far in Norman, and between our house and Moore was basically fields, and so I had a very clear vision. I walked out the back door, and the supercell took up my entire field of vision, left to right. I could see cloud base, and then the top of the funnel that basically went down to the ground. Every so often, there would be a flash. It was like a lightning flash from the ground, which of course was a tornado that was actually pulling transformers out of the ground or downing electrical transformers from their poles. It was visually impossible to miss. I turned on the radio, and every radio station I could find had live coverage from the local television stations talking about the Moore, Oklahoma tornado. And then off to my right was Interstate I-35, and I could see just a piece of it. And I-35 goes north south, and so cars going to the north are actually kind of getting towards where they might intersect with that F5 tornado. And I could see as they drove northward, they'd have to turn on their lights because it got so dark. And so I've always wondered what would lead someone to make that choice. Were they just getting to the next exit? Did they have to go find a relative? I don't know what was going in that decision process. But it's always made me wonder, how do people make decisions? And how can we help people perhaps make better decisions? It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to our moderator, Bernadette Woods-Plackey. Bernadette is Climate Central's Vice President for Engagement and Chief Meteorologist, where she leads the Climate Matters program, helping the public and decision makers better understand the science, impacts, and solutions related to climate change. She brings deep experience in science communication, partnerships with media and academic institutions, and a strong understanding of the connections between climate and weather. Bernadette's leadership across AMS and the broader scientific community makes her especially well suited to guide today's conversations. With that, I'll hand things over to Bernadette, who will introduce our speakers and lead today's discussion.
Thank you, Dave, for that thoughtful story and the thought that you put into this entire theme. And I really hope we use it as a moment to challenge ourselves to deeper thinking in our work. We are living in a time of rapid change, more extreme weather, a fragmented, fast-moving communication ecosystem. We're accelerating technology and innovation, and all of it is shaping how people process risk. Over the next few days, you're going to hear really cool advances in data, research, science, application from across this entire community. But information alone is not enough. To truly make a difference, we need to get the right information to the right people in the right ways at the right time. That's where communication becomes a solution. Effective communication is grounded in knowing your audience, and today we're going to hear from two leaders who will help us do exactly that by deepening our understanding of how people process information, how they connect with the world around them, and make decisions, so that we can educate and empower people from our shared mission, just really to keep people safe and prepared. So with that, I get the opportunity to announce our first speaker, who is remote today. We've got Cass Sunstein joining us. Now, for those who don't know Cass, he is currently the Robert Walensee University Professor at Harvard. He's a founder and director of the program on behavioral economics and public policy at Harvard Law School. In 2018, he received a really prestigious award, the Holberg Prize, from the government of Norway. From 2009 to 12, he was administrator of the White House Office of Information Information and Regulatory Affairs. And after that, he served on the President's Review Board on Intelligence and Communication Technologies and on the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Board. Mr. Sunstein has testified before congressional committees on many subjects, and he's advised officials at the UN, European Commission, World Bank, many nations, across issues of law and public policy. He has served as an advisor on the Behavioral Insights team at the United Kingdom. Now, many of you probably also know Mr. Sunstein for all of his books and articles. And he has a lot of really cool books out there. And I was getting ready for this. It's really hard to decide which one to read. But one that many people know most, and we're going to hear a little more about today, is Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness. Mr. Sunstein continued to move on with his work with the last administration, the Biden administration. He served as a counselor to the Secretary of Homeland Security during that administration, where he focused on resilience against weather-related risks, such as flooding and extreme heat, and a reduction of administrative burdens. And he was awarded a Distinguished Public Service Medal from the department's highest civilian honor in 2024. So it's really an honor, as you can tell, to see the have Cass here. Thank you, Cass. You can take it away now.
To keep us informed, to keep science proceeding. And you see the very happy people there. That's kind of my various emotions at getting to speak to you all, see how my various selves are celebrating. I was privileged to work, as you just heard, at the Department of Homeland Security, where your work and work involving weather-related risk was central to my job, and a lot of the work at the Department of Homeland Security was focused on communications of weather-related issues. Climate change, of course, is a contentious thing nationally, but it's not contentious to say that preparation against flooding and extreme heat and wildfire and drought, et cetera, that these are important to be to have preparations for. So we're going to talk about two systems in the human mind. We're going to say a little bit about algorithms and artificial intelligence, but our focus is going to be on people. Next slide. Okay, so what I've done for you is a book. Are you getting nervous that this is going to be a 6-hour talk? It's a short book. The first chapter is called Humanity. The second chapter is called Nudges, and the third chapter is called Feast. We actually have an acronym, HNF. Well, it's not an acronym, but please remember HNF, Humanity, Nudges, Feast. Next slide. Okay. Humanity is walking along that little construction, trying to get from one place to another. Next slide. And once upon a time, when I was a young law professor at the University of Chicago, and to some extent today, there's a rational actor model with respect to how people think. And according to the rational actor model, we update when we receive new information. We are highly responsive to incentives. We are frequently, maybe most of the time, not just frequently, self-interested. So people are rational, self-interested profit maximizers. That's what at the University of Chicago was taken as bedrock, and it has been the foundation for policy making all over the globe for decades. Sometimes there are intuitive senses that the rational actor model isn't quite right, but it is the theory to beat, except for the fact, next slide, that there was a Big Bang a number of decades ago, and you're seeing one of the creators of the Big Bang. That's a guy named Amos Tversky, who was thought to be the most charismatic person that one had ever met. He was also thought to be irresistible and charming. He was very funny. He said, "I'm an optimist, and the reason I'm an optimist is that it's rational. If you're a pessimist, you suffer twice." That captured Tversky's attitude toward the world. Next slide. You may recognize Daniel Kahneman, who's a little bit older than Tversky in that picture. They were about the same age, actually. They were contemporaries, and people who knew them both thought if the two met, what would happen. Would the energy in the room be so intense that there'd be a kind of explosion? Those who knew Tversky thought he was the most brilliant person ever. Those who knew Kahneman thought he might actually be Tversky's equal. And at one point, it's sometimes called the friendship that changed the world, or Kahneman-Tversky's Big Bang. Tversky was invited by Kahneman to speak at Kahneman's workshop, and Tversky said that the way the human mind works is that we are rational updaters. If we think that there's no such thing as climate change, and then we get scientific data suggesting there is, we will update rationally, and people are really good intuitive statisticians. It was a dazzling performance, and Kahneman responded by saying, that was amazing, that was brilliant, and I don't believe a word of it. And that skepticism on the part of the person you're now seeing excited Tversky. It was the only time Tversky ever lost an argument, and it produced, next slide, two famous papers, one of which emphasizes that the human mind works not by being statistical. That's not how even experts tend to be. That's not natural. But we use heuristics or rules of thumb, and they create biases. If there's been a flood recently in our area, we tend to think the risk of a flood is really high. If there hasn't been a flood in our area recently, we tend to think the risk of a flood is really low. It's called the availability heuristic. It's not crazy to use it, but it can lead to systematic errors in the form of a bias. Human beings also use the representativeness heuristic. If you see, let's say, a placid area where the waters are peaceful and people are sunning, you tend to think that's representative of a placid, stable situation. But the representativeness heuristic may misfire because there might be a flood there the day after tomorrow. Representativeness and availability are heuristics that human beings use. They're pretty good, but they lead to mistakes. We also tend to anchor. If people are asked what are the last three numbers of their social security number, and then asked how many nations are there in the United Nations, the first number, the last three numbers of their social security number biases them. So if the last numbers are 010, they might think, oh, must be 110 nations. The last three numbers are 983. People might think, well, there are 272. It must be high. And that's a reflection of the power of anchor. Prospect theory says that people really hate losses. They hate losses about twice as much as they like gains. And the fact that people are so negative about losses leads to biases in judgment, where the prospect of a loss, think maybe a carbon tax, can activate the mind. The prospect of a gain, that's good, but it's not as terrible as the prospect of a loss is terrible. These are two of the most widely cited papers in all of social science, and they're two papers that were like nuclear bombs in the best sense into theories of human rationality. Next slide. Okay, here are 5 findings in yellow, so they're hard to see. That's deliberate. I want your system 2 to be working so you can see the difference between system 1 and system 2 very quickly. People tend to show present bias. The short term really matters. The long term is a foreign country. Later land, people aren't sure they're ever going to visit. That bears on risk-taking behavior. It also bears on weather-related behavior. And present bias actually informs government regulatory policy in thinking about how to handle fuel efficiency and energy efficiency rules, knowing that consumers may underestimate, in the sense of not really giving weight to, long-term savings from, let's say, a fuel-efficient car. About 94% of drivers think they're better than the average driver. About 94% of university professors, regrettably, think they're better than the average university professor. About 100% of humanity thinks their sense of humor is better than the average sense of humor. That's because each of us really knows what's funny. Optimistic bias can lead to a failure to take precautions, and to skewing in the sense that comforting news people take on board, alarming news people tend to think, I don't agree with that. That's, you're just trying to scare me. Inertia is an extremely powerful force. Status quo bias is a thing. If people are asked to change their behavior, the current situation has a kind of magnet attached to it. We can dislodge the magnet, but inertia is more powerful than rational actor models suggest. As noted, losses loom very large. People don't like them. And our attention is limited in the sense that the number of things to which we can attend in the course of an hour or a week is a subset of the things that matter to us. And I can report that at the Department of Homeland Security, we were very conscious of the challenge of limited attention in thinking about weather-related risks. Next slide. Okay, now you have System 1 and System 2. This is what Kahneman, when he hit 75, something like that, publicized by saying that present bias and inertia and unrealistic optimism and loss aversion and limited attention, all 5 of those things are a product of the intuitive, rapid, automatic system that makes us think when we see, let's say, a cute baby adorable, or when the plane starts to shake, we think danger. The baby probably is cute. When the plane is shaking, it probably is safe. System 2 is the more deliberative, reflective system. It's slower. System 1 knows 2 plus 2 is 4. You don't even have to think about it. System 1 knows that. System 2 doesn't have to get engaged. If the question is what's 142 times 376, if you've got an amazing System 1, you just figured it out. If you're like me, you have to get a pencil out or use your laptop to do the calculation. System 2 does calculations. Next slide. AI often can combat the biases we've just been discussing, the human biases. In particular, algorithms outperform doctors and lawyers, forgive me that cough, in deciding whether people should be tested for an ailment or whether people should be freed for bail. The reason algorithms do better is that they don't use the heuristics that lead human beings to err. Large language models, by contrast, because of their training data, are increasingly showing the very cognitive biases that human beings show. And that's a real problem for reliance on artificial intelligence. It tends to use fast thinking human style like that. It can also use deliberative thinking human style like that. The second can lead to extraordinary findings and transmission of information. The first can lead to errors which people replicate. Next slide. Okay, we're on to chapter 2, which is called nudges. I would be particularly fond of this. Next slide. There's me with President Obama because uses of the System 1, System 2 distinction came to the US government in 2009 to 2012. And I can report that the essential work done in that period persisted under President Trump and under President Biden. So this isn't really partisan stuff at all. It's about using interventions that don't cost very much to promote safety, health, and environmental improvement. That's why they're not very controversial, because they don't cost very much. Next slide. Okay, that's fudge, because I thought I should offer that to you for your patience. It has nothing to do with the slide, but that's fudge. These are 2 kinds of nudges we're going to discuss. Next slide. The first will be familiar to you, and they are central to weather-related challenges. These are efforts to combat and improve System 1 and to help System 1. So there might be a warning saying that extreme heat is going to be a problem this week, and here are some things you should do. There might be a label on products that say something about harms associated with those products. There may be information disclosure so that when you buy, let's say, an automobile, there might be information in the form of a nudge that tells you this is going to have this virtue or this vice. Or you might inform people of social norms. Most people are doing this now. Give that such weight as you want to. And the beauty of educative nudges is they're like GPS devices. That is, they give people information, but they fully preserve freedom of choice. And I'm hoping you're thinking now of lots of areas in which that can be done. So a GPS device preserves your freedom in the sense that it's you who decides where to go, not the device. And in the sense that you can say, if I want to go to Atlanta, I like this route, not that route. You get to choose. That freedom is preserved for you. Nonetheless, a GPS device is a fantastic gain for humanity because it helps people get where they want to go. It's an educative nudge. Next slide. Here's an example of educative nudging, two different examples actually. And if you look at the one on the right, you're going to see something that was very self-consciously emphasized by those who were engaged in System 1 and System 2, fast thinking, slow thinking. The one on the left, there's a lot of information. System 2 has to work really hard, and System 1 might just fog over. The one on the right, System 1 says, oh, 230 calories. Got it. And the judgment was that calories are the most important, and you want something very clear and vivid, so that System 1 says, I see. And that can be used in multiple domains. Next slide. This one is System 1 Big Time. It's a graphic warning label, and both the Trump administration and the Biden and Obama administrations have been keen on this idea, where, and you can think of your preferred examples, in some areas of risk, including weather-related risk, you want to get fast thinking engaged because slow thinking is stubborn. And if you tell people, look, tobacco can harm your children or smoking can kill you, System 1 says, oh my gosh, I guess I won't be so optimistic, and loss aversion will kick in favor of not starting or stopping. Hasten to add, I'm not a smoker, so this cough is unrelated to smoking, I promise. Next slide. Okay, here are architectural defaults where you can make something automatic. So instead of making something complicated, you can make it really easy for System 1. Typically, 26% more people participate if it's opt-out than opt-in. And Switzerland has used automatic enrollment in green energy as a way of making life easy for System 1. And in the educational domain, DC has done the same thing for parents. It's just automatic. You don't have to do any work at all. Next slide. Okay, Chapter 3, Feast. I was told for public speaking, it's very good if you cough a lot because people pay attention. Is it working? Is this strategy working? Feast is an acronym. Next slide. A genuine acronym. Next one. E is for easy. In the United Kingdom, in Australia, in Germany, in other countries, the idea is if you want people to do something, make it easy. Don't make System 2 labor. Make System 1 just go about its day. The idea might be that participation in a program is going to be like that. You don't have to do so much. And what we found is that simplification can increase participation by 40 to 60%. And complexity can decrease participation. And that's because slow thinking is effortful and people won't want to do it. Next slide. S is for social. People are very alert to the social norm. If people are doing something, other people seem to think that's probably the right thing to do. And numbers can really matter. And if there's a new trend toward doing something, people will often pick up on it. we were very alert to this with respect to weather-related risks, trying to promote new and better and safer social norms. Next slide. I hope you like kangaroos. They're supposed to be attractive, and they're attractive in two different ways. First, they're good looking, and second is they capture the eye. So the idea is that often if you want to change behavior, it's very important to capture the eye. And also if the thing that's capturing the eye is in some sense attractive, that really matters. And for, let's say, increased safety, that is, the kangaroo model is useful. Next slide. Okay, T is for timely. And now you have the EAST framework, which is based on decades of scientific research about human behavior: easy, attractive, social, and timely. If you tell people to do something at the time when they're making a decision, it can work. If you tell them to do it the night before or the day before, good luck with that. The EAST framework is in use in many nations, and in fact in medical circles also, as a way of helping patients. And the theory behind the EAST framework is that all of those letters activate system one or help system one and can empower system two if we need to enlist it. Next slide. Okay, F is for fun. So this is my addition to the European EAST framework. Amazon, as you may know, has packaging called frustration-free packaging. It's actually eco-packaging, but frustration-free makes people smile. And the bet, which I'm sure Amazon has data on, is if people smile, they're going to click. Pepsi has something called Pepsi Max, which does very well, and a drink called Diet Pepsi, which sometimes does well. There are places where Pepsi Max outperforms Diet Pepsi, not because it's so much more delicious, but because the idea of Pepsi Max makes people think Max and also diet. Whereas Diet Pepsi makes people kind of grimace, diet, and also Pepsi. The idea of Pepsi Max is a kind of metaphor for behavior change that makes system one dance a little bit. And if system one is feeling grim and chastised and frightened, it might be that behavior change, in this case consumption, won't happen. Stanford has found that if you say that certain vegetables are healthy, you get a 14% increase in consumption. If you say that certain vegetables are delicious, you get a 27% increase in consumption. These are all bits of data supporting the importance of positive affect. And my view is that in the domain of climate and the environment, too often scientific material has been introduced in a way that makes people feel scared or dispirited or maybe reprimanded. And that makes system one very defensive, and system two has to work really hard to get system one on board. I'm talking about slow thinking and fast thinking, of course. And if we can get fast thinking upbeat and optimistic and smiling or laughing, then there's a partnership between fast thinking and slow thinking that can lead to very large scale behavior change. Think about, for example, seatbelt buckling or the reduction of smoking, both of which have had positive affect, not just concern and fear associated with them. Next slide. Okay, so I've given you the 3 chapters. This is the epigraph to the book, which is, what is it that is the most precious thing that people have? It's a question. And the answer, according to the epilogue, it's my epilogue, so I would know. The answer to the question, what's the most precious thing people have, is time. Let's find, shall we, ways to give people more of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Cass. That was fantastic. So now we are going to shift to our next speaker. And I just want to remind people that you're seeing the slide pop up occasionally for the Slido. And you can start submitting your questions now if you would like, and upvoting questions. So I just want to point that out. Okay, next up we have the wonderful Dr. Hannah Perfecto. She is an associate professor of marketing at Washington University in St. Louis. She studies myriad of topics within decision making, often centered around the antecedents and consequences of the ease with which people make everyday decisions. Many of her projects have a secondary goal to improve how research is done by assessing previous work, considering its ability to have real-world impact. Her research has been published in top journals in both marketing and psychology, and has earned her the MSI Young Scholar Award from the Marketing Science Institute and the Hillel Einhorn New Investigator Award from the Society of Judgment and Decision Making. Prior to joining the faculty at Olin, she received a PhD from the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley and a BSc in Psychology at Yale. So now, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much to everyone for having me and for having this forum. I'm really excited to share some of my work on how we deal with hard questions and easy questions. And so this project comes from, different buttons, so many buttons. If only it was more straightforward for System 1. Because my work, like Cass's and like this Clicker problem just now, is drawn from this dual process model that Kahneman and Tversky came to propose after that Big Bang that Cass mentioned, with System 1 being fast and frugal, being driven by intuition, System 2 being driven more by deliberation, more analytical, that takes a little bit more time to kick in. Whereas Cass's approach is more top-down, saying, given awareness of these different types of cognitive shortcuts that we might take, how can we implement policy changes and choice architecture and nudges in order to mitigate and minimize their effects? I, as an academic research professor, take more of a bottom-up approach, saying, how can we find and where are there more cognitive shortcuts that we haven't yet found, and publishing them in academic journals. My field, for better or for worse, tends to prioritize novelty in these contributions, and so not only since this Big Bang have there been lots of new cognitive shortcuts discovered, there's also been an incentive to describe novel mechanisms behind them, saying that they're all a lot more different than maybe they should be. So what I like to do in my current and ongoing work is to take a step back at this large literature of findings in judgment and decision making, rather than, say, looking at individual trees or trying to find new branches on those trees. Just take a step back and say, what can we learn about the forest as a whole? Is there a way that we can unite some of these previously disparate findings under some larger umbrella? And so one of those uniters that we're going to talk about today is called attribute substitution. I'm not the cool person who came up with attribute substitution. Daniel Kahneman and his co-author Shane Frederick popularized this term in 2002. They used it to describe a few of the cognitive biases that were initially discovered after that Big Bang. But in my work, I argue that attribute substitution is much more pervasive and powerful force over our decision making than we have been giving it credit for. And so today, my goal is to introduce you to attribute substitution, tell you what that actually means, walk through an example to see it in action, and then at the end, I'll briefly touch on an array of heuristics and biases to see how attribute substitution fits in the hopes that something that we touch on today resonates with you and the types of decisions that you make in your work. So attribute substitution is when we are faced with a hard question, but rather than grapple with that hard question, our fast and frugal system 1 wants to be more efficient and will substitute in an easier question instead. And this substitution often happens even below our level of awareness. So we think we're answering that hard question that was posed to us, but in reality, we're providing the answer to a different question, this easier So what makes a hard question hard? Primarily when the key piece of information that we need isn't very accessible. By accessible, I mean cognitively accessible. So hard to think about, doesn't come to mind very easily, not very intuitive. And so these hard questions are likely to be substituted if there is a convenient, more easily accessed piece of information nearby that's related. And so to show an example of actually substitution in action, I conveniently, genuinely already had a very on-theme series of experiments where I asked my participants to make predictions about the weather, about temperature in different cities in the US. So I asked participants to consider that the average high temperature in Houston, Texas on June 28th is typically 92 degrees. That is true. I then asked them whether they thought the high temperature on June 28th of this year in Houston, Texas would be greater or less than 92 degrees. Now, that is a really hard question to answer. I'm sure there are many folks here with really fancy models that are able to try to bring some information or support to that question. This is also way out in the future, so those models might not even make a prediction with great confidence, and these are just lay people who don't have those kinds of tools and sophistication. It's a particularly hard question because 92 degrees is, as the average, not especially hot or cold for Houston at this time. So this is a hard question, but there are some intuitive lures as part of this question. You're asking me about temperature in summer in Houston. Houston is hot. When it's not being hit by an Arctic blast, Houston is hot. And the summer, June 28th, is typically hot in the US. And so it's really hard to say whether it's going to be hotter than average in Houston on June 28th, but it's definitely going to be hot on June 28th in Houston. And so my co-authors and I propose that when people are trying to answer the hard question, they're going to be substituting in this easier question instead. Now, because attribute substitution often operates below our level of awareness, we don't realize that it's happening, we can't ask participants directly, how did you answer this question? What were you thinking about when you were doing it? And so instead, we randomly assigned one group of people to answer the hard question on the top, and another group of people to answer the easy question on the bottom. And so if we're right, then the hotter people think Texas is going to be, or Houston is going to be on June 28th, the more people in the other group that will say it's going to be hotter than average. So we're gonna look at that result. I was told not to present charts, but I'm a data person, I'm an empiricist, I really gotta present at least one chart, but we will walk through it slowly so everyone's on the same page. On the x-axis down at the bottom, we have the easy question, average answer to the easy question. For methodological reasons, we ask this easy question on a 1 to 7 scale, where 1 means it's going to be very cold in Houston on that day, and 7 means it's going to be very hot in Houston on that day. On the y-axis, we have the percentage of people who said it's going to be hotter than average in Texas, in Houston on that day. And so here is our data point for Houston. Very unsurprisingly, people think it's going to be very, very hot in Houston on June 28th. But more surprising and more interesting is that almost 80% of our sample who were asked this hard question said it was going to be hotter than average on that day in Texas. Now, we didn't want to just ask about Houston or just ask about June 28th, so we asked about a few more cities on a few more dates. And these different cities and dates cluster together really nicely on this chart. So I really like this chart. So in addition, on the upper right-hand side, we can see the other hot cities like Miami in July. It's hard to say whether Miami is going to be hotter than average on July 18th, but it's definitely going to be really hot. And so accordingly, just like in Houston in June, we see a high percentage, overwhelming majority of participants saying it's going to be hotter than average. Conversely, down at the bottom left of the chart, we see cold cities in cold months. So Anchorage, Alaska in January, is it going to be hotter than average on January 12th in Anchorage, Alaska? That is a really hard question. A much easier question is it going to be cold in Anchorage, Alaska in the middle of January. It certainly is, and so accordingly, we see a lot fewer people saying that it's going to be hotter than average for our polar states. Then we have mismatches in the middle, Anchorage, Alaska in the middle of summer, or Houston in the dead of winter, hard to say, so they're sort of in the middle on our easy question, and accordingly in the middle on our hard question as well. The relationship between these two variables is really strong. I have up there a correlation of 0.84, not 0.84 factorial, like 0.84. I don't know the types of effect sizes that you all work with in your data, but for me in behavioral world, keep touching the mic, for me in behavioral world, 0.84 is an enormous relationship. For those of us who don't remember our high school stats classes, correlations can get as big as 1. They show how closely related variables are together. We think about travel time to get to this convention versus travel distance. If you traveled a really long way, you probably came from many miles away. If you had a very short drive to the convention center today, you probably lived really close by. This relationship is not that much smaller than that one, so this was really surprising. Now you might say, Hannah, I don't know, you come from behavioral science, you might not have heard of this thing called climate change, that things are getting warmer over time, so it's not surprising that so many participants said that it's going to be warmer than average next in the following year. I might say that that wouldn't explain why there's so many more people saying that for the hot cities and hot months and cold cities and cold months. You might say, but you're not a meteorologist, which is correct. And so we also looked at these results in the past. So we gave some participants, or rather we gave all participants, the recorded high temperature for different cities and different dates, just like before. But we did it for just 2025. We asked some people to make predictions about 2026 on that day in that city, and some people to make estimates about that same city date in 2024. The future predictions look exactly the same as on the previous slide, and the past predictions didn't look that much different, which taken together kind of gives us this weird paradox that our participants are jointly suggesting that Houston is both colder than it will be next year, but also colder than it was last year. So that can't be right. So this is where attribute substitution is now starting to lead our participants astray. And the relationship between those two variables in the past, our easy question and our hard question, was still really quite large. If you still have concerns in our temperature domain, we explored many others, a few of which I'll summarize here. We looked at predicting stock prices, so instead of hot cities and temperature, we talked about, or asked participants about successful companies like Apple and less successful companies like BlackBerry, and asked them to consider the current stock prices of all these companies. We asked them, is this current stock price going to be higher or lower in 1 year from now for all these different companies? That is an extremely hard question. If that question is easy to you and you are good at it, then you should quit your job and go do that for a living. You'll make a ton of money. Instead, a much easier question down in green is, well, is Apple a successful company? Successful companies have high stock prices, less good companies have lower stock prices. And here we saw an even larger correlation between our easy question in red and our hard question, our easy question in green and our hard question in red. This correlation was so large, I genuinely double-checked my analysis code and just reran the experiment again to make sure something wasn't broken, and it still turned out this large. If you are concerned about the economic component of our stock study, the predicting pet popularity, where we asked participants to consider popular pets and less popular pets, so dogs and cats versus rabbits and spiders. And we said, will there be more owners of this type of animal as a pet in the coming year? That's an extremely hard question to answer. A much easier question is, well, how popular are these pets? And so people thought that popular pets, like cats and dogs, would be more popular in the future, and less popular pets, like spiders, would be less decreasing in popularity over time. There's no reason to believe that that would necessarily be the case. And finally, not predictions at all, but just looking at asking participants to estimate animal sizes. So here we ask participants to consider a series of heavy animals like elephants and rhinos and small animals like mice. And we asked them, gave them a specific weight, and we said, is this weight higher or lower than what the average weight for this animal is? That's a hard question. A much easier question that's substituted in is just how big is this animal? So for all of our heavy animals, like elephants and rhinos, participants said it needs to be an even higher weight, your estimate is too low. And for small animals, they said your estimate is too high. And so in all of these cases, we get these really large effect sizes, so large that what it suggests to us is that even though we had two groups of people ask two different questions, a red question and a green question, in the end, they're just answering the same single question, that green question, even if they don't realize it. So, having given a brief overview of seeing attribute substitution in action, we're going to briefly touch on a number of heuristics and biases, some of which Cass mentioned, to see how attribute action is related. The first is this better than average effect. So Cass talked about how 54% of drivers think that they are better than average drivers, and many professors like to think that they are better than average, when statistically that can't be true. We can't all be better than the average. Attribute substitution is in play here because it's really hard for me as a professor to think about the average quality of my fellow professors. But a much easier question is, well, am I a professor? I'd certainly like to think so, and so I substitute that in instead. There's also a worse than average effect. So when we are asked about things that we aren't very good at, so instead of asking how good a driver, we say, how good are you at basket weaving? Probably not great, but most people aren't very good at basket weaving. Nevertheless, because how good are you better than the average person at basket weaving is a hard question. Much easier question is, are you good at it? And so many people, the majority of people, will report they're worse than average at things like basket weaving, and that also can't statistically be the case. There's a couple of findings from sports betting where people can make mistakes through attribute substitution. So certain types of bets are over-under bets, where you're betting whether the total point scored is going to be greater or less than a given value. That's a really hard question to answer. A much easier question is there going to be a lot of scoring? Is it going to be a very high-scoring game? And so we see from historical data from sports betting websites that for very high-scoring games, people tend to increasingly bet on the over versus the under, and similarly for another type of bet, betting against the spread is will the team that's favored to win by a given margin, not just win outright. That is a really hard question, but a much easier question is the favored team to win going to win? Probably. And so in games where the gap in records between the favorite and the underdog is wider and wider, preferences for favoring the favorite to beat the spread is wider and wider. And we can look at historical data from these games as they play out and see that this does not actually bear out in real life. High-scoring games are no more likely to beat the over versus under, and favorites are no more likely to beat the spread no matter how favored they are. So these folks are making mistakes. Finally, we have a few biases about failing to consider certain types of information. So scope insensitivity is a phenomenon where we don't give sufficient weight to changes in magnitude or in size. So if I, for example, see a forecast about wind at 5 miles an hour one week, and then another week I see a forecast for wind at 15 miles per hour, I don't really have a sense of what 5 miles an hour is versus 15 miles an hour. It's wind. And so I might take some preparations for the 5 miles an hour day, but I'll probably take the same type of preparations on the 15 miles an hour day. I'm not sensitive to this change in scope. Base rate neglect is another way of failing to consider certain key pieces of information. Imagine on a later day during a conference across the room, you hear a particularly booming, sonorous, good-sounding voice, you might be curious who that is and wonder what they do as their contribution to AMS. And that's a very hard question to answer. You don't know anything about this person, you've just spotted them from across the room. But you might think instead, an easier question to answer is, does that person sound like they could be a broadcast meteorologist? Good voice for TV, good voice for radio. And that is not the right move to take, because the majority of AMS participants are not broadcast meteorologists. There are lots of folks here doing all sorts of different things, and so statistically, it is unlikely that random person that you spotted across the room is in fact a broadcast meteorologist. Halo effect is when you go to meet up with this person with a really nice voice from across the room. You already have a favorable view of them. They're probably at least a little bit friendly and cordial to you as you approach them. And this halo effect means you're much more likely to ascribe even more positive characteristics to them. So you might go back at the end of the day and tell your friend about this person you met with a great voice, who was pretty friendly, who was also really funny and a great guy, and seems to be really good at his job. For the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about question order effects, but instead conclude just with the idea of the availability heuristic and representativeness that Cass talked about before, that these two heuristics can help us figure out what types of attributes are going to be substituted. So in the halo effect, we're substituting something that is very salient and top of mind. Whereas with representativeness, I'm substituting in more a construct that I think is a good exemplar of a windy day or a broadcast meteorologist. So, that is what I have for you today on attribute substitution. I hope that we all know a little bit more about this very pervasive type of bias that affects our decisions. I have my email up there. I strongly encourage you folks to reach out to me if you want to learn more about decision making and see how it might be able to interact and improve with your research. But in the meantime, I'm looking forward to answering your questions soon, and I'll do my best not to substitute in any easy ones for any questions you might have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Want to put back up the Slido.
For everybody here, take a moment, scan it in. You can ask questions, or
You can upvote other questions. If it triggers something really interesting for you, here's an opportunity to bring it up. Or it might actually get you thinking of something else you want to ask too. So as everyone's doing that, I'll give you a moment to do that. I did have a question, and we're going to ask that in a moment. We're in a different time right now where things are moving so fast, and the concept of fact is a huge town. And people are being fed different algorithms, different information systems, everything. So it's pushing critical thinking skills in very different directions than we've ever done before. So if each of you could take a moment and start with you here, as we saw on the slide, how you're thinking about that in this moment of high work, and also what people here could practically apply to their work in this moment too. Understanding how people make decisions, how they think. How can you navigate that complexity and still break through with our warnings, our watches, our risk that's increasing on so many different levels in this community?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think part of the issue is that in some ways the information we're getting is almost insufficiently complex because it's being curated for us by these algorithms to give us to highlight confirmation bias, something that Cass touched on a tiny bit about naming
let's isolate problems. One problem is noted as confirmation bias. If people hear something that fits with what they already believe, they find it more credible. The second separate problem is motivated reasoning, where people hear something that is pleasing to them, they're more likely to believe it than if it's disruptive or displeasing. And confirmation bias and motivated reasoning often march hand in hand, but they can go in different directions. As in, when you're motivated to believe something, but it's disconfirming, and motivated reasoning kind of wins. So those are two. The third is called truth bias, where people tend to believe what they hear is true. That's just how the mind works. And if it's repeated, this is the concept of the truth bias. It's repeated. There's something called the illusory truth effect, where if you hear it a couple of times, then it's easy to process and you can't believe it's true, which is one reason this information is very powerful. Okay, so those are problems. Here are three solutions. The first is you have to get people's attention. So as noted, there's a lot going on in the ecosystem, and if there's something that is part of the noise, it's going to work. So you have to get people's attention. The second is the source has to be credible. So if the source is known to be affiliated with something that people don't trust, then it won't work. If it doesn't have any particular valence of skepticism associated with it, then it's more likely to work. There's actually a fantastically comforting paper called the illusory backfire effect, which shows that if you give people information that is trusted by them, that's not going to backfire. It might be called the elusive backfire effect. And the third thing is keep it simple. So if the information is all complicated, people tend to be suspicious. Simplicity is associated with a belief that the speaker is confident, and people use something called the confidence heuristic. So if they see people saying, it's really true that X, they're more likely to believe it. So simple / confidence, a credible source, and get people's attention.
That's really fascinating. So, Cass, I don't know if you've worked with many in this community, you've worked with Ed Mayback, and we've done a lot of work with advancing public understanding of climate change through meteorologists. And they hit a lot of these points that you're saying, and there's a famous quote from Ed that many here probably have heard of it: simple messages repeated often by a variety of trusted messengers. It really encapsulates lot has happened. So even just reading some of these pieces recently in light of how much is changing in how we process information, I'm curious if you had already thought about an addendum or what you would add to the latest version that you have for people to understand.
Thank you for that. I'm very focused on the topic of manipulation. It's consistent with your previous question. So what is manipulation? When does it work? Why is it bad? And how is it different from nudging? So people really don't like to be manipulated. They feel they're being treated as objects or as fools. Manipulation involves, I think, not respecting people's capacity for reflective and deliberative choice. People really don't like it. So nudges need to avoid that, and manipulation needs to be called out. I think we need now, right, not to be manipulated. That's modern equivalent, I think, of the right to privacy, which was created 100 years ago. It's an umbrella concept. And it might involve strict legal prohibitions, sort that the U.S. government has occasionally tried to introduce. Or it might involve just calling it out and saying there's a norm. And that should, not do everything that needs to be done, but do something. So we need a book that follows nudge called Manipulation, and there might be such a book. Probably.
And it's a case you work, it might come out in a month. So. Okay.
That's been a preoccupation.
That's wonderful, thank you. So we've got slide working here, everybody, and thank you for the tests on it. Okay, the one that is rising to the top for so many people, and this, both of you, I would like to answer this. Does the frequent use of AI lead to more System 1 thinking with that less critical thinking that you sort of tapped into? You go ahead first.
Sure. So AI, I assume they're referring to AI can come in a lot of different forms. You can have generative AI, the large language models, so Castro is ancient. There's some models that are drawing on work that's out there in the world, like ChatGPT, reading, scraping all of the web pages out there based on the sorts of things that we say, being able to just ask a question and get the response does facilitate both System 1 and System 2 in that we can grow for even deeper thinking. It gives us the cognitive bandwidth to continue to ask more and more questions and to drill down in a way that we might not have the regular cognitive resources to do. But more likely, in more cases, we get the answer, we read it, sounds good, and we move on without interrogating it maybe as deeply as we should.
Has anything to add to that?
And I agree with that. That makes sense.
So this is another great one that comes in and is very specific to this community, and it's for Cass. It says, how can fun apply to things that might be unambiguously not fun, like a Category 5 hurricane or the extinction of humanity climate change? Now, this is how it's written. I'm not saying that I think we're going to have a full extinction of humanity here.
That's completely fantastic. So if there's something alarming that's about to happen, one possible reaction that can be generated is fear, and fear can introduce paralysis and skepticism, because people don't want to see it. If you can introduce with people, this is a risk, here's what you can do to protect yourself in a way that has maybe a smile or a nod associated with it, it can really work. And we saw under the COVID, let's say the scare people strategy and also the self-protection effort, which didn't have necessarily fear as the dominant emotion, it more had hope. So to tell people it's going to be awful, extinction, risk, or whatever, if that's true, that might be what needs to be done, and fear appeals do work, but it might be better to accompany fear appeals with hope resources. So we did the cigarette warning labels when I was at the White House. getting to a red line isn't exactly fun, that is both associated with it.
That is really important, and I know in the climate community, that is a big topic of conversation, where there are people that are really focused on the hope side of things. There are people talking about the seriousness is so serious, and it seems like you need a little bit of all of it, because you have to help people understand what's going on, but then guide them for that efficacy to be able to make decisions that empower them.
Right, and everything has to be tested, but the kind of first line response is give people a sense that there's a genuine risk and things need to be done, and then immediately follow it with a path that they can take that can get them in a situation which has hope and maybe laughter.
Right. There are opportunities, people. There really are opportunities to find some of those links within it. And it can be hard at times, but there are. Okay, we got another one that's just a comment, I'm just going to say, because it's risen to the top here. So, yes, the kangaroos are attractive and Pepsi Max is best. How awesome would Kangaroo Max be?
And the person who asked that question has a startup, which I hope will start up tomorrow.
That's a good one. Okay, so let's start hand on this one. It seems people want deterministic info for decisions, but often forecast info comes from probabilities. So do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, probabilities are so tough. So some of the early climate diversity work also looked at how people underweight small probabilities, overweight small probabilities, underweight large probabilities, and there's different ways we can convey probability. So I know like a common form is dealing with percentages. Frequencies can sometimes be more helpful, like 30 out of 100 days like this will have snow, as opposed to 30% chance of snow today. But translating that continuous outcome to a deterministic outcome is really challenging. I think that goes back a little bit to the confidence in your forecast. So it's hard to be confident when you don't give a path to action. I saw one of the local Houston channels, they said things that we know, things that we don't yet know. And so I think like dichotomizing things in that way, or providing barriers to signal. Now we've crossed over to a new threshold that we should start thinking about differently, and avoiding that scope and sensitivity problem where like 30%, 40%, those kind of feel the same thing to me. I don't know, 50% might feel the same way to me. So when we go from one category to another category that feels more distinct, can maybe bridge that gap between fully continuous outcomes and fully dichotomous outcomes. But it's certainly so tricky.
Anything to add?
That was good. So 20% might be less useful than 20 out of 100.
Okay, so we're running low on time, and I'm going to leave this as the last question with both of you. And this, I think, applies to a lot of stuff of what happens when people work in this room here. So, how do you recommend dealing with someone influential who has a confirmation bias different from things? Cass, let's start with you.
Okay, so the greatest boxer ever lived was Muhammad Ali, and he was also the most arrogant boxer ever lived. He knew he was great, he called himself the greatest. The greatest trainer who ever lived was Angelo Dundee, who was a psychologist and a behavioral scientist by intuition, and he trained Ali. And he was asked, how could you train the greatest fighter who was also the most arrogant fighter? And he said it was simple. If Muhammad wasn't throwing his left enough, I'd say, Muhammad, you were throwing your left so well today. Your left is the best left I've ever seen, and today is the best you've ever thrown. And Dundee would say, then Ali would start throwing left. So wouldn't you correct him? He took appeal to his something in what he already was at least willing to think. When I was in government, if I wanted to change a view, if I could do it credibly, I'd attribute the the position that I wanted to prevail to the person who I thought would be most skeptical in the room. I'd say that, as X has been saying for the last 3 months, we need to focus on Y. And if that was false, it wouldn't work. But if that any truth in it, it would work. So if confirmation bias is working against you, the part of the person you're trying to persuade, get at something in that person that person already thinks that can be confirmed.
That's great.
I agree, that's really great.
Somebody there?
Happy to do that. That's great.
Well, thank you so much, Cass. Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you, Dave, for organizing this great session. And I want to challenge everybody as they go through this week to think deeper, process this in how you can apply it to your work to connect and really drive your overall change. Let's have fun doing it. Let's take that with us. So thank you.
All right, well, that was amazing. So again, thank you, Cass and Bernadette. Let's give one more round of applause. All right, so we are going to begin our awards ceremony at 5:30. So please grab some sparkling wine or ginger ale at the back and return to your seats so you can't leave. And you might want to save a little bit because there will be a toast courtesy of ASRC Federal here starting at 5:30. So please stretch